Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending today's news conference. Bonjour et merci d'être présent. My name is Sophie Wistaff, and I'm with the Media Relations team at the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. We're here today to release our investigation report into the 2021 loss of containers and fire on board the ZIM Kingston. The news conference will begin in English, followed by French, and will last approximately 20 minutes. We will have a question period at the end. We ask that you please mute your cell phones. Nous sommes ici aujourd'hui pour publier notre rapport d'enquête sur la perte de conteneurs et l'incendie survenu en 2021 à bord du ZIM Kingston. La conférence de presse débutera en anglais, suivie du français et durera environ 20 minutes. Elle sera suivie d'une période de questions. Veuillez s'il vous plaît mettre vos téléphones en mode silencieux. Our panelists today are Kathy Fox, Chair of the TSB, Joanne Marier, Board Member, and Étienne Séguin-Bertrand, Senior Investigator for the Marine Branch. We will now begin with the presentation in English. Madam Fox.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We're here today to issue two safety concerns following the 2021 occurrence involving the container vessel ZIM Kingston at La Perouse Bank off Vancouver Island, British Columbia, which resulted in the loss of 109 containers overboard, as well as an onboard fire that lasted for 5 days. This type of accident is not just a maritime mishap. The effects are far-reaching and long-lasting. The consequences of such accidents threaten marine ecosystems and endanger vessels and their crews, as well as the health and safety of both Canadians and those beyond our borders. The loss of a container can take seconds, but years later, the damage remains. I'll turn things over to Étienne, who will walk you through the events, explaining how things unfolded the way they did and why.
Thank you, Kathy. On October 6, 2021, the ZIM Kingston departed Busan, South Korea, loaded with nearly 2,000 containers holding both dangerous goods and consumer products. As the vessel was nearing Vancouver on October 21st, 3 days ahead of schedule, the master was told that there were no anchorages available, and consequently, he decided to hold the vessel offshore outside the Juan de Fuca Strait. At around 10:30 p.m. local time, the vessel rolled heavily from port to starboard 4 times, sending 109 containers, approximately 11% of the vessel's deck cargo, overboard. The majority of containers likely sank, while those that remained afloat began to drift northwest, parallel to the Vancouver Island coastline. At the time of the occurrence, the ZIM Kingston was encountering strong gale force wind and 5 to 6 meter wave. However, the weather conditions were not extreme for a vessel of that size and design. 36 hours after the containers were lost and after the vessel had proceeded to Constance Bank anchorage, a fire broke out on board in a collapsed container that held dangerous goods. The fire then spread to the nearby container and lasted for 5 days. Model testing conducted during our investigation confirmed that the ZIM Kingston experienced parametric rolling, a complex phenomenon difficult to predict and, as we've seen in this occurrence, one that can have damaging consequences. Parametric rolling develops when sea conditions, like the wave height, length, and direction, combined with other factors, many of which are vessel-specific, for example, its stability, speed, hull form, or length. When these factors interact in a precise way, sudden dangerous rolling motions are generated. While parametric rolling can happen in stormy weather, it can happen in a wide range of environmental conditions as well. This occurrence brought to the forefront the challenges that Canada faces when dealing with marine emergencies that go beyond the response capacity of the vessel crew, including the availability of resources to respond to vessel fires and incidents involving hazardous and noxious substances. After the fire broke out on the vessel, the crew responded with all the equipment they had available to them. However, the fire exceeded their capacity to respond, and outside assistance was required. The emergency response that followed was initiated mainly due to incidental but fortunate circumstances. First, United States legislation required that vessels transiting U.S. waters, like the ZIM Kingston, have a pre-existing marine salvage and response contract in place in the event of a marine emergency. Second, this contractor was quickly able to task 2 foreign-flagged vessels with firefighting capabilities that happened to be in Victoria at the time. Our investigation found that the fire response followed industry standards and was conducted efficiently. The contract between the ship's manager and the US-based marine salvage and response contractor meant that there was rapid access to emergency specialists who provided guidance and to a team of trained personnel who were able to board the vessel and help contain the fire. The 2 foreign-flagged vessels provided important firefighting support during the response, a capacity that is not readily available in the area. Kathy will now tell you about the 2 safety concerns the board is issuing today.
With the loss of over 100 shipping containers and their contents, the Zim Kingston occurrence had and continues to have far-reaching impacts. Containers lost at sea are a hazard to navigation while floating, and once they drift ashore or sink and break apart, they can become a risk to coastal environments and marine habitats. Following this occurrence, a debris removal plan was developed to recover existing stranded containers and their contents, and the vessel owner took on the responsibility for the initial cleanup efforts, which concluded in December 2022. However, as of January this year, the ongoing beach cleanups in BC have found new debris that is likely from the Zim Kingston along large stretches of the coastline. The freshness of the debris suggests that the containers continue to release their contents. In total, an estimated 1,490 tons of cargo were lost overboard. Only around 48 tons were recovered during the short-term cleanup efforts, which means that 97% of the debris remains in our waters or washed up on coastlines. The volume and variety of contents lost overboard, as well as the general lack of studies on container spills, make it difficult to determine the long-term consequences that this and other such occurrences will continue to have on Canadian waters and coastlines. Our first safety concern relates to the need for comprehensive guidance for managing the risk of parametric rolling. Our investigation found that the risk of parametric rolling could have been identified using guidance material that is generally available to industry. However, this guidance material was not on board the Zim Kingston at the time of the occurrence. Although material available to industry provides guidance on how to identify the risk of parametric rolling developing, it does not provide comprehensive guidance to help vessel owners, charterers, and bridge crews to manage the risk effectively. There are inconsistencies and inadequacies with respect to the training of bridge crews and the adoption of procedures and tools to support them in managing the risk. The International Maritime Organization is taking steps to update industry guidance for the management of parametric rolling. However, this will take time. In the meantime, the board is concerned that the absence of up-to-date, comprehensive industry guidance for the management of parametric rolling may cause company policies, procedures, tools, and training to be inconsistent, ineffective, or absent altogether, which could lead to more container loss occurrences along with their associated negative outcomes for safety and the environment. Our second safety concern focuses on Canada's preparedness for marine emergencies. Large commercial vessels are generally equipped to handle emergencies on board, and crew members are trained accordingly. However, there are times when an emergency expands beyond the capacity of the crew to respond. Having pre-established salvage and response arrangements can improve the timeliness of the response through availability of vessel information and pre-planning. In this occurrence, it was extremely fortunate that the vessel's manager had made pre-arrangements for emergency response and that there happened to be 2 suitably equipped vessels nearby. It is important not to mistake this luck for emergency preparedness. The next time, we might not be as lucky. Following amendments to the Canada Shipping Act, the Government of Canada now has the authority to make regulations regarding emergency arrangements for vessels. The government has also recognized the need to improve preparedness for hazardous and noxious substances occurrences. A single national system to respond to all marine pollution incidents is currently in development, with the implementation planned for 2027. Transport Canada is developing regulations to require emergency response arrangements, but they estimate that this work will take 4 years to complete and will not be in place before 2028. We know from past experience that developing regulations could take substantially longer than anticipated, but there's no need for that. It's a matter of priorities, and surely it could be done much quicker. Therefore, the Board is concerned that there are gaps in Canada's preparedness for marine emergencies that exceed the response capacity of a vessel's crew, posing a risk to vessels, the environment, and the health and safety of the general public. There needs to be more urgent and effective action to address marine emergencies in Canadian waters to reduce associated risks. The ZIM Kingston has added another chapter to the history of maritime emergencies, highlighting the ever-present risk to people, property, and the environment. It's not a matter of if, but when a similar incident will occur. And the question is, will Canada be prepared for it?
We will now start the question period. We ask that you please use the microphones on each side of the room and that you identify yourself and your media. You may ask one question and one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant passer à la période de questions. Nous vous demandons d'utiliser les microphones des deux côtés de la salle, de vous identifier et de préciser votre affiliation. Vous pouvez poser une question et une question suivie. Madame?
Hi, Ashley Joanno of the Canadian Press. This is hardly the first time that these concerns have been raised. It's hardly even the first time these concerns have been raised about the ZIM Kingston. About a year-ish ago, the House of Commons got a committee report that said essentially very similar things. So I guess the question is, have you gotten a response from the federal government at all, and how confident are you that they'll actually listen to your concerns coming from you when this isn't the first time they've been raised?
Well, with respect to the House of Commons report of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans, as you're probably aware, the government did respond to that committee, and of course, that is the way it works. They respond to them, not to us. We're issuing these two concerns today. They are included in the report. They are included in the letter that was sent to the minister, and also in a briefing that we gave Transport Canada and DFO officials a couple of days ago. We have asked for a response from them. Under our legislation, the Minister of Transport isn't required to respond to our concerns, but we certainly hope that they will, and we'll continue to monitor their actions going forward, as well as through our ongoing investigations.
With regards to the rolling concern, I'm curious whether there's anything that Canada specifically can do because there's so much international jurisdiction on waters. Is it just a matter of you hoping that Canada will push international bodies to make these changes, or are there actual steps that Canada can take that would make a significant difference, you think?
Well, first of all, the International Maritime Organization is best positioned because the phenomena of parametric rolling isn't unique to Canadian waters. Obviously, it's a worldwide phenomena. It's been known for many, many years. The International Maritime Organization, or IMO, is in fact has developed interim guidelines for the shipping industry to address the risk of parametric rolling. Some of the companies are currently trying out those guidelines, and what our hope is that they will be made permanent and mandatory, and that they will include more than just assessing the risk of parametric rolling, but also procedures, tools, and training so that bridge crews are better prepared to deal with that risk. Specifically, the Government of Canada, we hope, and Transport Canada in particular, will advocate for our concern to IMO as the state representative. And also, in the meantime, ship operators can learn from this occurrence and others that have been investigated by other investigation agencies around the world, and encourage them to take steps to better inform their crews about the risks, to be better use tools and procedures in order to manage the risk of parametric rolling so that there's less opportunity for this to occur in the future. So they don't have to wait for IMO or the Government of Canada to act.
Thank you.
Yasmin Gandam, CTV News in Vancouver. I wanted to ask you actually a bit more about that parametric rolling because you did say that it's not solely, environmental. So I wanted to know if the storm didn't occur, would this still have happened? I mean, what was really the trigger here?
So, as we discussed and as we found in the investigation, parametric rolling requires the combination of a very specific wave train with a very specific vessels. So in this case, the Zim Kingston was not alone drifting off Vancouver Island that day, but it was the only vessel affected because it's the only vessel that fell in that specific envelope where the wavelength and height and direction combined with the design of the vessel to trigger parametric rolling.
Okay. And also, we spoke a bit about this, but that, there is this call out to the federal government to address some of these gaps. But I just wanted a bit more specifics on what exactly you're looking for. What sorts of guidance and regulations do you think would really make a difference here?
Well, we know that there's a number of initiatives underway, and for example, the Oceans Protection Plan, which was developed a few years ago and as of Budget 2022 has received additional funding for the next 9 years, envisions a number of steps that the various government departments that are involved, I'm talking about Transport Canada, Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Environment and Climate Change Canada, can take to reduce the risk, the environmental risks associated with marine, with the maritime sector. But as we mentioned here, one of the important measures that could be taken in the short term would be to implement regulations that require vessels coming into Canadian waters to have prearranged marine emergency response and salvage plans. As we mentioned, in the case of the Zim Kingston, because it routinely stopped in American waters, it was subject to U.S. legislation, it did have those plans. That, combined with the fortuitous availability of two firefighting vessels in Victoria at the time, those two factors combined to make this response much more timely than it might have been otherwise. So we think if Canada can implement those regulations sooner, then at least it will improve the timeliness of the response. But there's many other things that can be done, and those best placed to address them are either Transport Canada or Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
Emma Hautecoeur de Radio-Canada, donc des réponses en français, s'il vous plaît. Vous dites que, il y a des mesures qui sont en cours d'élaboration au niveau du roulis paramétrique, au niveau des réglementations par rapport au plan d'intervention d'urgence maritime au Canada. Vous dites que le délai n'est pas nécessaire, donc si vous pouvez expliquer un peu quelles sont les mesures qui peuvent être mises en place maintenant par le Canada pour prévenir ce genre d'incident.
Bon, en ce qui concerne le roulis paramétrique, l'Organisation maritime internationale a publié des lignes directrices intérimaires qui existent aujourd'hui. Ces lignes directrices-là ne sont pas obligatoires, mais c'est certain que les opérateurs de navires pourraient les adopter de façon volontaire, puis ça aiderait à réduire le risque énormément en attendant que ces lignes directrices-là deviennent obligatoires. En ce qui concerne les plans d'intervention d'urgence, il n'y a rien qui empêche les opérateurs de navires aujourd'hui de conclure des ententes avec des entreprises qui fournissent ce genre de services-là, d'être proactifs pour gérer le risque avant que la réglementation devienne obligatoire dans au moins 4 ans, peut-être plus.
D'accord. Et peut-être au niveau de la pollution environnementale, là, est-ce que vous pouvez m'expliquer un peu où est-ce qu'on en est? De ce que j'ai compris, c'est que la compagnie a été assez proactive justement pour essayer de retrouver les containers. Bon, on dit qu'il y a encore 97% des débris qui sont dans nos océans ou sur nos berges. À ce moment-ci, qu'est-ce qui se passe au niveau du gouvernement pour évaluer l'impact environnemental et pour rapatrier donc possiblement le plus de débris possible?
Donc, suite à l'incident, il y a eu des efforts de nettoyage initiaux qui ont été lancés par le propriétaire du navire. Ces efforts-là se sont terminés en 2022. Par la suite, il y a eu des efforts d'identification des débris menés par Pêche et Océan, puis aussi des efforts de nettoyage, disons plus à une échelle communautaire, donc nettoyer le long des côtes et tout ça. Aujourd'hui, les éléments qui nous parviennent, c'est plus des éléments anecdotiques, par exemple des débris qui vont être retrouvés le long des côtes et tout ça. Donc, c'est la phase, disons, intense de récupération des débris est terminée à ce jour.
Et si je peux juste me permettre une dernière question, est-ce qu'il devrait, selon vous, justement, avoir un système national ensuite? Donc, il devrait y avoir un système national d'intervention d'urgence, donc au moment de l'incident, des mesures en place. Est-ce qu'il devrait y avoir un système national pour adresser justement la pollution et les conséquences environnementales?
Ben, c'est déjà dans la législation canadienne. Il y a déjà des dispositions dans la législation qui exigent que le propriétaire du navire paie les coûts du nettoyage. Cette responsabilité-là est limitée dans le temps. Dépendamment des circonstances, la responsabilité peut aller jusqu'à 6 ans. Et donc, c'est déjà prévu dans la loi. Suite aux efforts de nettoyage initiaux, comme j'ai dit, il y a eu d'autres efforts qui ont été menés par d'autres organisations. Là, en ce qui concerne la facturation exacte de comment ça s'est passé par après, on ne s'est pas penché là-dessus.
Merci. So we have a question from someone watching online. So,
This question's from John Ryan from KUOW, Pugo Sound Radio. And the question is, please comment on the captain's decision to stay outside of the Strait of Juan de Fuca in the more dangerous waters than using the so-called racetrack inside the strait, which other large vessels were safely using while waiting anchorage space. Has the captain, the company, or anyone else been held accountable for the actions that led to this disaster?
Thank you. So first and foremost, it's not the duty of the board to assign blame or responsibility. The decision of the master to go in and drift off Vancouver Island was based on information he received that there was no anchorages available, and he may not have been aware of the possibility of using a racetrack pattern in the Juan de Fuca Strait. At the time, the decision to drift was not outside of normal practice for the industry.
okay. Anyone else have a question in the room? We're done? Okay. So our spokespeople are available for follow-up interviews, one-on-one interviews. So if you are interested in that, you can come and see one of us. Thank you for joining today. Nos porte-paroles sont disponibles pour une entrevue, pour des entrevues de suivi, donc vous pouvez venir nous voir pour en faire la demande. Puis on vous remercie d'avoir été présent aujourd'hui. Passez une belle journée.